All right. Hi, folks, and welcome. We are officially live. It's so great to see everyone join this live stream. So hello, and welcome. I have it that it is 11 o'clock a.m. over here in Santa Cruz, California, but we'll get started in just about a minute or two to give folks the opportunity to get settled into today's program and get excited for today's conversation. And as we're waiting for folks to join, please go ahead and say hi in the YouTube live chat and introduce yourself and say where you're watching from. We love to see where Seymour Center supporters are tuning in from. So go ahead and say hi. And during today's program, Katie and I can also give you a quick shout out as we are chatting away today. Alrighty, hello folks. So it looks like a few more folks are joining us, so welcome. If you haven't heard already, we are going to get started in just about a minute. I would say maybe about 30 seconds, just to give folks a little extra wiggle room of time to get settled in. All right. Hello and welcome everyone. It's so great to virtually see you all. It looks like we have Lori joining us, and Kat Dale is also joining us, and everyone is very excited to see Katie. So, and Tara is also joining us. So hello and welcome. All right, well, Katie, I don't know about you, but I am so excited to get started, and there's really not much time to waste. So hi, everyone, and officially welcome to another Labside Chat with the Seymour Marine Discovery Center. My name is Jen, and I will be your host for today. If this is your first time tuning in for a Labside Chat, welcome. Today's program gives us the wonderful opportunity to have a short, engaging, exciting conversation with a scientist from UC Santa Cruz to really chat about how scientific research plays a role in the understanding and conservation of the world's oceans. I'm so excited for today's chat because we have the pleasure of talking with and asking questions to Katie Kobayashi. Katie Kobayashi is a Ph.D. candidate in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology department here at UC Santa Cruz and is also a graduate student researcher with the Fisheries Collaborative Program. So Katie, thank you so much for spending a part of your morning with us today.
So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, I can also say that I'm not the only one that's really excited that you're here because so many community members actually submitted questions for you in advance for today's conversation. And those questions range all over the map, and I'm so excited to ask those questions to you. But if folks watching at home didn't get the chance to ask questions in advance, not to worry, you can still ask your question in the YouTube live chat feature. So feel free to type your question in there, and Katie and I will be able to answer those as well. All right. So, I mean, Katie, there's a lot of questions. I really hope you're ready because I feel like this is going to be like a rapid fire conversation.
Okay, fire away.
Great.
Ready.
Awesome. Well, just to kick us off, you study freshwater organisms and freshwater food webs. Is that correct?
That is correct. I do.
Awesome. And so freshwater organisms, freshwater food webs, a lot of folks or a lot of supporters of the Seymour Center are like, hey, you guys talk about the ocean all the time. Why are we talking about freshwater here? And I'm hoping that you can also talk a little bit about how freshwater organisms connect to the ocean and why it's so important to understand that connectivity for ocean health and ocean conservation.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually, to start off, just learned a fun fact yesterday that there are roughly 35,000 species of fish in our aquatic environments in the world. And more than half of them, about 51% of them, actually reside in freshwater. So even though we're a relatively small amount of the habitat we think about in aquatic environments, especially at the Seymour Center, there are a lot of critters living in there. The other important thing to keep in mind that I think about quite a bit is a lot of species migrate back and forth between freshwater and the ocean. I primarily study steelhead and rainbow trout. And steelhead do migrate to the ocean. So they spend part of their time in streams and the other part of their time in the ocean. And so that connectivity is really important when we're thinking about food webs and resource management.
Oh, definitely. I also want to say too, so you said steelhead and rainbow trout, and those two words really stick out to me because I think that is the question on everyone's mind. Like, you look at rainbow trout and steelhead and we're like, okay, great. Is there a difference between the two? What's going on there?
So yes and no. It depends on what we're considering. Steelhead and rainbow trout are the two common names that we use to describe a single species. And the scientific name of that species is Oncorhynchus micus. It's quite a mouthful. So this is one species that can reproduce with itself, obviously. And it produces these two very different life history types is what we call them. So steelhead migrate to the ocean, much like a salmon does, and returns to freshwater to spawn, whereas rainbow trout stay in freshwater for their entire life cycle. They never migrate, they just stay put. The reality is there's quite a spectrum of strategies that these fish take that occur in between these two kind of extremes. But that's where the name steelhead and rainbow trout came from, were these two different strategies that are exhibited by a single species. So as a result, these fish spawn with one another. A steelhead parent can produce rainbow offspring and vice versa. So they're really the same species.
That is so cool. Like, that blows my mind because so you have the same species, but just different life history variations and like where they go in the stream versus the ocean. That completely blows my mind. So very, very cool. And so when you're studying this fish, I guess it's not two different fishes, right? It's one species. So when you're looking at steelhead or rainbow trout, like what is it about this species that you're really trying to understand? So like what type of questions are you trying to answer with your research?
Yeah, so because these two strategies that steelhead and rainbow trout exhibit are so different from one another, what happens is that the traits, everything from how the fish looks to how it behaves, also feels very different from one another. So there's way more food in the ocean, and as a result, steelhead get huge. If anybody on the call is an angler of any sort, they'll be able to think about the steelhead that they catch coming in from the ocean that are big, big fish compared to maybe the rainbow trout, little dinkers that they catch, in a lake somewhere. And that can have huge effects on food webs because they have a different status in terms of how much they're eating and what they're eating at different stages of their life. So I really focus on how those differences between these two strategies can influence who's getting eaten in the rest of the food web.
Yeah, wow. And so where does this species of steelhead and rainbow trout, where do they live, right? So is there a specific range that these animals are found in along California's coastline? Are they found further up north, further south? Where exactly where are they found, and where does your research focus on?
Yeah. So as a species, Oncorhynchus micus is found all over the world at this point. Rainbow trout is actually arguably one of the most popular sport fish on the planet. So as a result, they've been introduced all over. However, the native range for steelhead and rainbow trout is within the Pacific Basin. They've been found basically all along the coast, historically as far south as Baja California, Mexico, and then all the way up the West Coast through California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and then all the way around to the other end of the Pacific Basin in Russia. So they have spanned this whole geographic region and then have also been introduced in every hemisphere and every continent, essentially.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so we also got a really interesting question about a keystone gene found in this species. I honestly, I know nothing about this, so I'm so relying on you to help me figure out what this question means. But is there like a keystone gene that, I don't know, affects the fishes, like where they go in like different locations, how it affects the food web? Like what does this question mean? Keystone gene.
So I think whoever submitted this question must know a little bit something more specific about my research, because one of the factors that I am considering in these questions I'm asking is there is a gene in Micus. I'm going to use Micus for short for saying steelhead and rainbow trout. There's a gene in this species that has been shown to control a large proportion of the life history variation we see in these two types. That gene is called OMI5, and it was originally found to be closely associated with whether or not fish migrated to the ocean. So as more genomics research has come to light, we've actually found the structure of this gene controls a whole suite of different traits that basically get inherited as a set. And so Keystone Gene is some kind of trendy lingo for suggesting that there's one gene that controls all these different traits that can have a really huge effect on the downstream end of the food chain.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And how did we figure that out? Like, how did we figure out that one gene controls all of these different features? Do we know that?
That's really where like the rubber is currently hitting the road. So I work with a team of genomicists who do a lot of the actual sequencing work on one end. And then my role is primarily actually going out and catching these fish and looking at these different traits and measuring them in the field, and trying to piece back together what sort of associations we're seeing between those two things. Mm-hmm. So how are they matching up?
Yeah. And so can you tell me a little bit about this field experience? Because I have a picture of in my mind what it's like, and I just need to know if I'm right or not. But can you describe a typical field day in like a typical field day for you? And when I say typical field day, I'm mostly thinking, back in maybe 2019, when you're out with a team of researchers and you don't have to be masked or follow different protocols. Like, what does a research day look like as a scientist for you?
A lot of bushwhacking.
Really? Like, even though like you are looking at animals in streams and in lakes and in water, you have to carve through and make your own trail. So how does that happen?
So much of what I do. So I'll back up a little bit. But I work primarily in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Specifically, I work in some of the coastal streams. If you've ever been near Davenport, I work in Scott Creek primarily, which is just north of Davenport. It is a redwood forest with a thick understory, or at least it used to have one. We can talk about that too. But and I hike all over the watershed to find different and establish different study sites where I go out and conduct a whole suite of different surveys. But the first thing that has to happen before I am catching fish and catching insects and measuring traits is I have to figure out where I'm going in a forest with no trails. So the vast majority of the beginning of my field season is taking out undergrads, showing them how to swing a machete, and making our own trails, literally forging our own trails. From there, we use a capture method called electrofishing, which runs a small electric current through the water to temporarily stun fish so we can scoop them up and catch them. We sample them, we take photos and measure them and tag them, and then they recover just fine and we put them back where we found them. So it's a lot of physical effort. It's a full contact sport out there, and a lot of time hanging in the trees.
Definitely. So this is just now occurring to me, and this may seem like a silly question. It's my personal question, but rainbow trout, steelhead, what do they really look like? Like, what color are they? How big do they grow? Do they blend in really well to their environment? I just have so many questions about their appearance.
Yeah. So rainbow trout. I'm trying to think if I wish I had a picture handy. Rainbow trout, they tend to be very speckly. They have a kind of greenish back with lots and lots of black freckles on them. They usually have a red band across the sides of their bodies, and that's where they kind of get the name rainbow from. And then usually a lighter belly. And so that darker green back and lighter belly is a really common trait in a lot of fish to kind of mimic the camouflage colors of if a predator were looking down, they blend in with the rocks. If the predator is looking from below, they blend in with the light in the sky. So yeah, they're really pretty little critters in my very biased opinion.
Well, I will take your word for it. So when you were talking about a typical field day and you were hiking around forests and you said hiking around the watershed, can you tell me what a watershed is?
Yeah, definitely. A watershed describes the entire region of land that drains into a single outlet. So if you think of an analogy would be to think of your bathroom sink. So the water that's running through your sink might be the river, but the entire area that's draining into that same drain, that whole sink area, that whole basin is your watershed. So it includes, the land, the tributaries that all run into, in this case, the drain is the outlet into the ocean.
Right. So huge area. Awesome. Awesome. And you also mentioned that there's a lot of physical labor of getting to the actual study sites, right? So you're bushwhacking, you have the machetes, because there used to be a really thick understory. But then we all know that the CZU fire came through that area. And so does your work involve evaluating these study sites after the fire and the impact that it has on our watersheds?
Very much so. As devastating as these fires have been, it has created a unique opportunity to be able to look at how the effects of fire, especially in light of climate change and how these really catastrophic fires are occurring more frequently and more intensely, how that's going to affect the conservation status and population status of these fish. So because I've worked so closely in this watershed over the last several years and collected a lot of data prior to the fires, it's really created a sort of natural experiment for me to be able to go back and now ask, how do things look after the fire? How are these different these different consequences of fire, like landslides and loss of trees? How are those going to affect survival and abundance of fish in the streams?
Yeah, so I know it's pretty early, like looking at the data and doing these various experiments, but has anything emerged from looking at this? Like, have you noticed any really interesting changes or patterns in what you've been doing so far?
We don't have a super good sense of how things are going quite yet in this particular stream, but we do have some kind of running hypotheses that we're working with. One of which is when this canopy opens up. So the trees that normally shade the stream are burned. The stream is exposed to a lot more sunlight, and so the water can get quite warmer. So one of the things we're interested in is how that's affecting things like metabolic rate of fish or just survival. These are cold water fish that really have a certain tolerance to how warm they can handle the water. So those are the types of things we're interested in kind of looking at. And hopefully the water's still staying cool enough and these guys will keep chugging along.
Yeah, well, I am so interested in that work that you're doing. I know that I am going to be following along with you and your research team to learn what you guys are finding out. So that's very, very cool. And I can only imagine like to do this type of work and how, physically intense it is, you have to love what you do. And so have you always been interested in like wading in streams and looking at fish? Is this something you knew you wanted to do when you were like a little kid, or was there a spark somewhere later in your career?
It certainly wasn't a linear path to getting here. I have always had an interest in nature and being outdoors. Um, and so I think there was a part of me that was, call it destiny, call it what you will. This was something that I always loved, and I'm glad I landed here. But it was not initially the plan. When I started college, I had initially wanted to become a physician, go to med school. And somewhere along the way came to realize I was a lot more interested in studying fish than humans. And what really attracted me to what I do now is when I started having the opportunity to get out in the field and do the dirty bushwhacking part of what I do. I have always loved to hike. My Zoom background, this is actually me on a backpacking trip, fishing up in the Sierra Nevada area. And so I grew up loving fly fishing. My dad is a big fly fisherman, and that's one of our, bonding activities that we've gotten to get done, for many years. And so it kind of all just snowballed into realizing I could do science and do biology in a way that gets me out in the field where I love to be, studying something that was already a hobby of mine. So it's
Yeah.
being out in the field is really my favorite part of what I do.
Nice. I can tell that you are so passionate about it, and it comes through just how you talk about it. And so, do you have any advice for maybe someone who's watching at home who's really interested in science and wants to take their career further? Do you have any advice for these folks that are interested in science and looking for their next step?
Yeah. One is don't be afraid to reach out. Most of us love to talk about what we do. And so the more you can expose yourself to some of the different options that are out there and what we do for a living, the more you can kind of start to think about and try on those different hats and find your match. And then the next step in addition to asking people about their experiences is to try to experience as much of it for yourself as you can. I'm a huge advocate for especially, those who are still in the stage of their education where they have a lot of different options to try as many different things as they possibly can. It's okay to switch around. It's okay to change your mind. I've been, and it's, how you find the right fit for you.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I have a few more questions for you. We are somehow quickly running out of time, so only a few more questions left.
Sure.
And so we got a quick question about rainbow trout, steelhead, and if they are endangered or threatened, or is their population in trouble in some way?
So the way our endangered species system works is we actually break up the species, rainbow trout and steelhead, into different, they're called population segments, distinct population segments. And these kind of correspond with different geographic regions along their native range. So Southern California is a distinct population segment, which is slightly different than Central California or Northern California or Oregon or Washington. And then we also separate rainbow trout, which are often above barriers or in landlocked areas, from steelhead, which still have some sort of migration corridor with the ocean. So we chop up the species in all these different groups. And then the answer is some have conservation concerns and others don't.
Mm-hmm.
So here where I work in Central California, steelhead are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act and have experienced downward population declines in the last few decades for sure. South of here, similar story. You go far enough south and they're considered endangered. And they tend to, as you get further north in their range, their threatened status tends to dissipate out again, and they're doing better up there.
Okay. Well, we are so lucky to have you, boots on the ground, working here in Central California on this population, especially when maybe their population isn't doing too hot. So, but for all of us that are watching at home, and I'm talking about me again, is there anything that an individual or a non-scientist can do to maybe help out and help with conservation of the species?
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of, especially if you're local in the Santa Cruz area, there are a lot of really great organizations that are great ways to get involved. And the first step is educating yourself. So if you're here for this talk, you're already going in the right direction. Some different places to follow up with volunteer opportunities, maybe for restoration work, etc. So I am part of an organization. It's a subunit of the American Fisheries Society, which does a lot of great work connecting communities with their fisheries and also with scientists, so that we can all work together on some of these issues. And that subunit is called the Santa Cruz Monterey Bay Area Subunit, SCUMBASS for short, of AFS. So that's a great place to look for some more information. The Coastal Watershed Council is a great resource here in Santa Cruz as well for restoration opportunities.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing those resources. I think those are really great places to get more information and participate in our community to see how we can help. So that's really, really fantastic. So Katie, I don't know how this happened, but time has flown by so fast. So I have one last question for you. And I want to know, what is the best part of being a scientist? Like, do you have an absolute favorite part of your job?
Well, I've already talked about how much I love being in the field. So I will pick another one of my favorite parts of my job. And that's getting to work with students. I have really grown to love the teaching component of what I do, and have so much fun bringing students out for their first experiences in the field, and getting to really recreate that feeling of excitement I felt when I started getting to go out and do this kind of science out in nature. So getting to share that experience with others has been a huge, awesome experience for me.
Yeah, well, I can tell that you love teaching because I already learned so much from you. So maybe it's time for me to go out into the field with you, and I can learn directly from you even more. So thank you so much for sharing that. Well, we are somehow again out of time, and I have about 1,000 more questions to ask you, but unfortunately we can't. So do you have a website or a place online where folks can go to learn more about you and your research?
Yeah, sure. So you can find my personal contact information on my website, which is katie-kobayashi.com. I have an email on there. You're more than welcome. Anyone can email me questions. I'm happy to set up times to chat, especially with students, and answer questions over email. The other resource that's a great one for following up on some of this stuff that I just mentioned was SCUMBASS's Instagram account. So if this type of information is fun to you, definitely go give them a follow. And I do some cameos on there pretty regularly. I'm happy to connect you with folks in that organization.
Awesome. So I just dropped those links to those different resources in the YouTube live chat, so folks can go check it out there. But I'll also add those links to the video description below after we wrap up our conversation. But Katie, I just want to give you a huge thank you for being here, sharing your insight, your knowledge, your research with us. It's so inspiring, and I could really tell you love what you do. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a treat.
Awesome. And so before we wrap up and officially take off and enjoy the rest of our day, I also want to give a huge thank you to a couple of other folks who made this Labside Chat possible. First off, a huge shout out to the UC Santa Cruz Fisheries Collaborative Program in partnership with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Southwest Fisheries Science Center, who sponsored today's Labside Chat. So a huge thank you to them. We're so grateful for their support. And I also want to give a huge thank you to everyone that tuned in today. It's really supporters like you that make these online programs possible. And so if you're watching today and you love today's Labside Chat and you're interested and you're in the position, I ask that you please consider either making a donation or becoming a member with the Seymour Center so we can keep these Labside Chats free and open to the public. So more information can be found on our website, seymourcenter.ucsc.edu, or click on the links in the video description below. So again, thanks again, everyone. And make sure to tune in for our next Labside Chat on Thursday, April 22nd with Dr. Zika Glux. So mark your calendars and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone, and bye.